So if we go through the learning points of the module on being persecuted, we've learned that in the EU at least, any organisation at all, whether it's state or non-state, can be an actor of persecution. We've also learnt that the closest that the UK courts have really come to defining the nature of persecution is to describe it as something that is serious harm. It must be serious in nature. The EU Qualification Directive, as it's known for short, offers a framework for assessing whether something may or may not amount to persecution, and for example it makes clear that persecution may arise from a single incident, a one-off act, or it may arise from a course of conduct. It offers human rights law as a benchmark for assessing whether something crosses the threshold and amounts to persecution. We know that persecution can be cumulative in nature, so perhaps a series of things that taken by themselves wouldn't be persecutory in nature, but when taken cumulatively over a course of time may collectively amount to persecution. We know that there's an element of discrimination in persecution, and we also know that the particular impact on that individual, the victim, has to be considered, and that some people may suffer more severely than others for various different reasons. We've also learned that the convention reasons can be very important, and that the definition of a refugee, while it's helpful for these purposes for training to break it down into its constituent parts, sometimes those elements have to be read together, and the convention reasons can have a very important impact on whether treatment amounts to persecution or not. So a criminal, for example, who's committed a criminal act and is imprisoned isn't usually going to be a refugee. However, if, for example, the supposedly criminal act is one that's not internationally recognised, and that actually maybe amounts to some sort of morality crime or something like that, and is actually imposed for a convention reason, then we know that that person may be able to make out a claim to refugee status. Similarly, if the crime leads to disproportionate punishment, perhaps for a convention reason, then again that person might be entitled to refugee status because of the disproportionate nature of the punishment. Military service is one example of that. Now, there's generally speaking no good claim to refugee status simply for refusing to serve military service, and there are many countries around the world which impose that and impose conscription, and refusing to serve is simply breaking the law. It's not for a convention reason as such. That's what the courts have held. However, there could be some situations where a person who refuses military service may be entitled to refugee status, such as, for example, if the punishment that they suffer is disproportionate and it's because of a convention reason, such as race or religion, or perhaps if they refuse to serve in a conflict that may involve the commission of major human rights violations or war crimes. We also looked in this module at civil war, and we learned that the victims of a civil war may not have, they may have difficulties in making out a successful claim for refugee status, and that the courts have held that, generally speaking, the normal civilian casualties of a civil war should be considered simply to be unlucky, to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, but not to be targeted or persecuted because of a convention reason. However, there are exceptions to that, and if a victim can show that they've experienced what's called a differential impact, so they've suffered over and above other victims of the Civil War because of a convention reason, for example because of their race or something like that, then they may be able to make out a claim for refugee status. Or if the Civil War is because of a convention reason, such as race in a genocide situation or something like that, and civilians are deliberately targeted because of the convention reason, then again that may be an exception. People may well be able to make out a successful claim for refugee status there.